Jack was an experienced truck driver with many years on the road. He preferred driving at night to avoid the heavy daytime traffic. However, one night, he experienced a terrifying event on a remote mountain road that he would never forget. That night, the moon was hidden behind clouds, and the surroundings were pitch black. Jack drove his truck along the winding mountain road, with only the truck's headlights illuminating a small area ahead. The road was empty, and everything was eerily quiet. Jack felt a twinge of unease, but continued driving. Suddenly, he saw a figure by the roadside ahead, like someone standing there waiting. Jack frowned but slowed down and pulled the truck over next to the figure. It was an old man dressed in ragged clothes, with a face full of wrinkles and empty eyes. The old man was muttering something under his breath, but his voice was too faint for Jack to hear clearly. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Jack asked tentatively. The old man suddenly lifted his head and said in a hoarse voice, "Leave this place. Leave quickly. A chill ran down Jack's spine, and he took a step back. He turned and got back into his truck, thinking the old man might be crazy. He started the truck and continued driving. However, not long after, he saw another figure by the roadside. Jack cursed under his breath and stopped the truck again. This time, it was a woman in tattered clothes, with a pale face and empty eyes. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Jack asked again. The woman didn't respond, just stared at him, her lips moving as she repeated the same words, "Leave this place. Leave quickly. Double quotes. Jack's unease grew, and he felt an inexplicable fear. He got back into his truck, pressed the accelerator, and tried to leave the eerie mountain road as quickly as possible. No matter how he drove, figures kept appearing by the roadside. Sometimes it was an old man, sometimes a woman, sometimes a child, all repeating the same words, "Leave this place. Jack's heart pounded, and his breathing quickened. He felt like he was trapped in an endless nightmare. He kept speeding up, but the figures always appeared ahead, as if guiding him to an unknown destination. Finally, Jack saw an abandoned gas station ahead. A glimmer of hope rose in his chest as he pulled into the gas station and got out to look for help. However, the gas station was deserted, with only a dim light flickering. Jack entered the convenience store, suddenly hearing whispers and footsteps, as if a group of people were circling around him. He turned sharply and saw in the mirror a series of pale faces with empty eyes, their mouths repeating the same words, "Leave this place. A chill ran down Jack's spine, and he knew he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. He tried to leave the gas station, but no matter which way he went, he couldn't find the exit, as if trapped in an endless maze. Just as Jack was about to despair, he suddenly heard the screeching sound of brakes. A young truck driver burst into the convenience store, panting heavily, looking like he had just experienced a frightful event. "Did you see those figures too?" the young driver asked, his voice trembling with fear. Jack nodded, feeling a strange sense of comfort knowing he wasn't the only one caught in this bizarre predicament. The two decided to find a way out of this place together. They followed a broken path behind the gas station, hoping to find an exit to the main road. The thick fog enveloped the surroundings, reducing visibility to almost zero, with only the faint light of their phones illuminating a small area ahead. After walking through the fog for a long time, they finally saw a glimmer of light ahead. It was an abandoned wooden house, looking like it had been deserted for years. They exchanged glances and decided to check it out. Inside the wooden house, it was eerily silent, with only the wind whistling through the broken windows. There were a few old chairs and a rusty iron bed. On the wall hung an old yellowed photograph of a young couple and a little girl, all smiling happily. Jack approached the photo, suddenly feeling a chill behind him. He turned sharply and saw the young couple and the little girl standing behind him, their eyes empty, their faces pale, their mouths repeating, "Leave this place, dot dot dot." Jack stumbled backward, nearly falling. The young driver saw the eerie figures too, his face turning pale with fear. They realized this place was not just an ordinary abandoned site, but was enveloped by some sinister force. The two didn't waste any time and decided to leave the wooden house immediately and return to their trucks. On their way back, Jack felt something following him. He quickened his pace, but heard footsteps getting closer. He turned sharply and saw a little girl standing behind him, holding a tattered teddy bear, her eyes empty. "Brother, will you take me with you?" the girl said sweetly, but her voice sent shivers down Jack's spine. He didn't dare to answer and started running, with the young driver following closely. They got back to their trucks, hurriedly started the engines, and drove away from the eerie place. However, no matter how they drove, the thick fog still shrouded the road, making it seem endless. The eerie figures continued to appear by the roadside, repeating the same words, "Leave this place, dot dot dot." Jack and the young driver's spirits gradually broke, knowing they couldn't escape this dark road. Their souls would be trapped here forever, becoming the next cursed souls in this endless nightmare. Tom was a truck driver with over 10 years of driving experience. One night, he received an urgent job to deliver a shipment to a remote town. Despite feeling uneasy, he accepted the job because the pay was generous. Tom set off from a big city and drove onto a narrow country road. The road was very remote, with hardly any other vehicles passing by. As the evening wore on, the surroundings grew darker and darker. Only the truck's headlights illuminated a small area ahead. After driving for a while, Tom felt a bit tired. He decided to take a short break, so he pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. Just as he was about to close his eyes for a short nap, he suddenly heard a strange noise, like someone whispering. He snapped his eyes open and looked around but saw nothing. Tom thought he might have been too tired and misheard. He lay back down and closed his eyes again. Not long after, he heard the whispering again, clearer and closer this time. Tom no longer thought it was his imagination. He sat up, opened the door, and got out of the truck to see what was happening. The surroundings were pitch black, with only the truck's headlights illuminating the road ahead. Tom took out his flashlight and started looking around. He followed the direction of the sound and discovered an old wooden house by the roadside, its door half open, with whispers coming from inside. Tom hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to go in and take a look. Inside, the wooden house was dimly lit, with only a flickering old oil lamp in the corner. The whispering seemed to be coming from the basement. He cautiously approached the entrance to the basement and found the door half open. He pushed it open and walked down the stairs, the whispers growing louder, like many people whispering in his ears. In the basement, there was an old wooden table with some tattered photos on it. The people in the photos looked pale and had empty eyes, giving off a very eerie vibe. Tom felt a chill and was about to leave when he suddenly noticed a familiar figure in one of the photos. It was himself. He stumbled back a few steps, his heart pounding, staring at the photo in disbelief. In the photo, he stood in this basement pale and with empty eyes, just like the others in the photos. At that moment, the whispering turned into screaming, and the atmosphere in the basement became terrifying. Tom felt a surge of fear and ran up the stairs, trying to escape the eerie place. When he burst out of the wooden house, he found the scenery outside had become even more bizarre. The trees around him seemed twisted, and the air was filled with a suffocating feeling. The truck's headlights suddenly went out, plunging the area into darkness. Tom desperately ran towards the truck, trying to start the engine, but no matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't start. Just as he was about to give up, he heard footsteps approaching from behind. He turned sharply and saw a woman in tattered clothes slowly walking towards him, her face covered in blood, her eyes empty. She gave a twisted smile, her lips barely moving. "Leave this place, she said in a hoarse voice, filled with resentment and despair. Tom stepped back in terror, his legs weak. He turned to run, but the woman suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking his way. "Leave this place, she repeated, her voice sharper, as if tearing at his soul. Tom felt a wave of intense fear, knowing he couldn't escape this eerie place. His vision blurred, and his consciousness began to fade. When he woke up again, he found himself still sitting in the truck's driver's seat. It was now dawn and everything around him seemed normal. The wooden house had vanished and the bizarre scenery was gone. Tom panted heavily, feeling like he had experienced a nightmare. He started the truck, and the engine roared to life. He didn't dare linger any longer, and quickly drove away from that eerie road. When he woke up again, he found himself still sitting in the truck's driver's seat. It was now dawn and everything around him seemed normal. The wooden house had vanished and the bizarre scenery was gone. Tom panted heavily, feeling like he had experienced a nightmare. He started the truck, and the engine roared to life. He didn't dare linger any longer, and quickly drove away from that eerie road. Although he had left that eerie place, the memory of that night haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blood-stained face of that woman and heard her voice filled with resentment. Tom knew he could never escape the terror of that night, and it would haunt him forever. Josh was a seasoned truck driver, accustomed to the loneliness and solitude of long-haul deliveries. But he never imagined that one ordinary assignment would lead to the most terrifying experience of his life. That night, Josh departed from a small city, aiming to deliver a shipment to another town several hundred kilometers away. The weather forecast predicted heavy fog, but Josh didn't think much of it. He decided to stick to his schedule. As he drove into the wilderness, the surroundings became increasingly desolate. The forest grew denser, the moonlight obscured by thick clouds, and visibility became poor. A few hours later, the fog rolled in as predicted. It was so thick that he could barely see a few meters ahead. Josh slowed down and focused intently on the road ahead. While creeping along, he suddenly heard a strange sound like someone knocking on the cargo hold. He slammed on the brakes, bringing the truck to a halt. Josh stepped out, flashlight in hand, and inspected the cargo hold but found nothing out of the ordinary. "Must have imagined it," Josh muttered to himself, returning to the cab, ready to continue his journey. However, shortly after starting the engine again, the knocking sound returned, this time more urgently. Josh's heart raced as he stepped out once more to investigate. This time, he noticed faint silhouettes moving in the fog. He called out, but there was no response. Josh decided to ignore the strange occurrences and return to his truck, determined to leave this eerie place as quickly as possible. Yet, the truck refused to start. The engine seemed to have suddenly failed, no matter how hard he tried. The fog thickened, making it nearly impossible to see. Josh felt a creeping fear. He picked up his phone to call for help, only to find there was no signal. "Damn it, what kind of place is this?" he cursed in frustration. But it was futile. He decided to walk in search of a signal or help. Josh trudged through the thick fog, the silence around him broken only by the sound of his footsteps. Suddenly, he heard a low, mournful wail in the distance, like some kind of animal crying out. Josh quickened his pace, a sense of unease growing. After about 10 minutes, he came upon a dilapidated wooden cabin. The cabin looked especially eerie in the fog, but it was his only hope. He approached the cabin and gently pushed open the partially ajar door. Inside, it was dimly lit, with only a flickering oil lamp providing faint light. Josh called out loudly, but there was no response. Cautiously, He stepped into the cabin, noting the dust-covered floorboards that indicated it hadn't been occupied for a long time. As he looked around, he suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He turned quickly and saw a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes standing before him. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant, and a strange smile played on her lips. Cautiously, he stepped into the cabin, noting the dust-covered floorboards that indicated it hadn't been occupied for a long time. As he looked around, he suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He turned quickly and saw a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes standing before him. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant, and a strange smile played on her lips. Overcome with fear, Josh turned and ran out of the cabin, desperate to escape this haunting place. But the fog grew thicker, making it impossible to see the path ahead. He ran through the fog, feeling as though he was trapped in an endless maze. Every time he looked back, he could see the woman's figure faintly visible in the mist, as if she was chasing him. Exhausted, Josh knew he couldn't keep running aimlessly. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and tried to find a direction. Suddenly, he heard the sound of an engine in the distance. This gave him hope, and he walked toward the sound. Before long, he saw his truck, but the sight around it filled him with even greater terror. Surrounding the truck were numerous shadowy figures in the fog. They all had pale faces and vacant eyes, standing silently as if waiting for something. Josh's heart pounded, but he summoned his courage and tried to reach his truck. As he approached, the figures began to emit a low, mournful wail in unison, their voices filled with bitterness and pain. His heart felt like it was about to burst from his chest, but he knew he couldn't stop. He closed his eyes and ran with all his might towards the truck. When he finally jumped into the cab and shut the door, the wailing suddenly ceased. Josh, gasping for breath, his hands trembling, tried to start the engine once more. This time, the engine roared to life. He wasted no time and pressed the gas pedal, the truck quickly speeding away from that eerie place. The fog gradually lifted, and the scenery around him became clear again. By the time he reached his destination, it was already morning. Josh got out of the truck, still shaking, the terror of the night lingering in his mind. He decided never to travel that fog-covered wilderness road again. Though he had left the place, the horrific experience of that night would forever be etched in his memory. Every time the night grew quiet, Josh would remember the woman's eerie smile and the ghostly figures. He knew that no matter where he went, the terror from the wilderness would always haunt him.